Imagine waking up one morning to find the factory where you've worked for years closed. No warning, no explanation, just locked doors and your last paycheck in your pocket. In 1958, millions of people in America faced exactly this fear. That secure period, called the post-war golden age, crumbled unexpectedly. And this time, the collapse didn't start from the stock market. It started from the kitchen table. From the outside, 1950s America looked perfect. Suburban homes, single-income families, full refrigerators. Television showed happy families. Advertisements depicted a bright future. But behind the scenes, a slowdown was beginning that few noticed. That's when everything changed. Factories began to cut production. First, overtime was cancelled, then shifts were reduced, and one morning, workers were turned away at the door. The 1958 recession was quiet. A collapse didn't make headlines, but its impact created one of the harshest waves of unemployment ever seen. The unemployment rate in America quickly approached 7.5%. This might seem ordinary today, but at the time it meant the closure of the only source of income for millions of families. There was that fear everyone could experience. What if I lose my job tomorrow? A middle-aged father, he puts on his tie and leaves the house in the morning, but he no longer has a job to go to. He doesn't know how to explain this to his wife and children. He leaves the house at the same time every morning so as not to let the neighbors know. But the truly shocking thing was this. This crisis was not the result of a lazy economy, but rather of overproduction. America had overproduced cars, steel, machinery, but the world couldn't buy all that product. Warehouses filled up, orders were cancelled, factories shut down, and when it stopped, the first thing to fall was hope. Newspapers were still calling it a temporary slowdown. Politicians were giving the message that it was under control, but the reality inside homes was quite different. For the first time, children saw their mothers shorten their shopping lists. Meat was bought only once a week. New shoes were postponed until next month. And although no one said it out loud, everyone was thinking the same question. Is this really temporary? At the end of the episode, America still thought it was powerful, but it didn't realize the ground was being pulled out from under it. Because in the next phase, this crisis would not only cause unemployment, it would make the American dream itself questionable. But the truly shocking thing was this. Unemployment wasn't just a figure on paper. Every number meant a light going out in a house. By 1958, factories across America were shutting down one after another. The automotive industry was at the heart of the crisis. In Detroit, the assembly lines slowed down, then stopped completely. The chimneys in the steel cities stopped smoking, and this wasn't just a problem for the big cities. Small towns were hit harder. If a town had only one factory, when that factory closed, the town would close too. The grocery store wouldn't make any sales. The barber shop would be empty. Donations to the church would decrease. That's when everything changed. People turned to unemployment insurance. But the system wasn't ready for such a huge wave. Applications piled up. Payments were delayed. The fear that everyone could experience grew. Will this only last a few months, or will it last for years? There were two different Americas in the newspapers. The first America said, "The economy will recover soon." The second America waited silently in front of job advertisement billboards. Fathers repeated the same sentence to their children, "We need to be patient." But patience didn't fill the refrigerator. The most painful aspect of the 1958 recession was this. This crisis hit hard-working people, those who did their jobs properly, those who had worked in the same factory for years. No one was living in luxury. But still, it wasn't just the salary that was lost. What was lost was a sense of security. For the first time, people realized being tied to a single employer was dangerous. Relying on a single salary was fragile, but Washington was still cautious. The federal government was slow to intervene. Interest rates began to be lowered, but the effect was slow. Stimulus packages were discussed, but remained abstract for the average person. And meanwhile, the unemployment rate wasn't falling, but the real shock was yet to come, because this crisis would create a turning point that would change not only unemployment, America's outlook for the future. But the truly shocking thing was this. While experiencing such a deep wave of unemployment, America still hadn't quite decided what to do. The prevailing thought in Washington at the beginning of 1958 was simple: the market will recover on its own. This showed that the lessons supposedly learned after the Great Depression were slowly being forgotten. The recession was thought to be temporary. Officials were hesitant to create panic. But panic had already begun in the streets, and that's when everything changed. The Federal Reserve began lowering interest rates. Credit taps were loosened. But the problem was, people didn't want to borrow because there were no jobs to pay off the debt. Banks were cautious. They didn't want to lend to someone who was unemployed. This created a chain reaction of recession. Car sales collapsed. Home purchases stopped. Durable goods remained on the shelves, and America realized for the first time the economy wasn't just about numbers. Psychology was just as decisive as interest rates. During this period, a new word began to appear frequently in newspapers: confidence, trust. People had lost their trust. Fathers were applying for jobs secretly because they didn't want the neighbors to know. Mothers were spending more time looking at the shelves in the supermarket. Children were hearing the phrase, "There is no money," for the first time. But the real turning point occurred in politics. As the 1958 midterm elections approached, public pressure intensified. Voters were impatient. Unemployment was now being felt at the ballot box, and this pressure forced Washington to act. Public spending was increased. Infrastructure projects were accelerated. Defense and road investments were launched. These steps came late, but their impact would be powerful. By 1959, a slow recovery began in some sectors. Job advertisements reappeared. But everyone knew this. This crisis would not return America to its former state, because people had now learned this. Unemployment could happen to anyone. A diploma, loyalty, or experience were not a guarantee, and this awareness would open the door to much greater changes in the future. But the truly shocking thing was this. Even though the recession was officially declared over, its impact on people's lives was not. By 1959, some factories had reopened. Production figures began to recover. Newspapers ran headlines proclaiming the economy is recovering. But there was still silence at the kitchen tables. Many people who got their jobs back couldn't return to their old salaries. Hours shortened. Temporary contracts became common. The concept of full-time work was questioned for the first time. And this change was silent. No one took to the streets, but everyone was aware. It was at this point that everything took on a deeper dimension. The 1958 recession changed the internal dynamics of the American family. The idea of living on a single income began to weaken. In some households, women began working regularly for the first time. This was not a choice, but a necessity. Children began to consider working at an earlier age. Newspaper delivery, odd jobs, working during summer vacations. These were no longer about character development, but about necessity. The psychological effects were even more lasting. Many Americans who lived through those years carried the same fear into their later years. One morning, everything could be over. Therefore, people spent less. They became more cautious. They avoided debt. Even banks changed. Lending criteria tightened. Risk was no longer just a mathematical concept, but an emotional one. And perhaps most importantly, the view of the state changed. The 1958 recession reopened the debate on the necessity of federal intervention. For the first time, the question of when should the state intervene was asked so loudly. This question would echo in much larger crises in the decades to come. Because this crisis taught America this: economic recovery and social recovery are not the same thing. The numbers could recover, but confidence would return much more slowly. The 1958 recession was short-lived in numbers, but it lingered long in America's memory. This crisis wasn't as devastating as the Great Depression. Panic-stricken images didn't flood television. Banks didn't close overnight, but that's precisely why it was dangerous, because it was the first time American society realized not every crisis screams, some come silently. Even after unemployment rates fell, people didn't revert to their old habits. They were more cautious about buying homes. They delayed borrowing. The question, what if it happens again, stood behind many decisions. The 1958 recession changed the concept of confidence in America. Previously, confidence was based on the idea of sustained growth. After this crisis, confidence became synonymous with preparedness. Therefore, the America that grew in the 1960s was actually a more cautious America, a country that saved more, took fewer risks, and thought more about the future. Politicians also did not forget this crisis. The federal government learned to respond more quickly to economic slowdowns. Monetary policies began to be monitored more closely. Unemployment was no longer seen as just a statistic, but as a social threat. This perspective would manifest itself in every crisis that would follow: in the oil crises of the 1970s, in the interest rate shocks of the 1980s, in Black Monday of 1987. Each time, the same memory was in the background. What seemed small in 1958 shook the lives of millions. Those who were young back then are old today, but they remember that fear, the lock on a factory door, a salary that wouldn't last another week, the quietly calculated kitchen bills. That's why many older Americans are still wary of waste. That's why setting aside has become a reflex for them. That's why even abundance sometimes creates unease. The 1958 recession taught America this lesson: the economy is not just about money. The economy is how people sleep at night, and even when some crises are over, they continue to live on in people's minds. Therefore, 1958 is not just a year, it is a threshold in American memory, a quiet but instructive threshold. America was different in 1958. Not just the numbers, but the way people perceived the world was different too. In old America, work was central to identity. Working in a factory wasn't just about getting paid. It meant walking through the same door every morning, standing side by side with the same people for years, and believing that life wouldn't change. Therefore, someone who lost their job in 1958 lost not only their income, but also their certainty about the future. In the new America, things are more temporary. Changing jobs is normal. What we call a career is no longer a single line, but like a broken road. But what was lost in the old America is still felt today. In those years, people were wary of debt. Credit cards weren't central to life. If something was to be bought, it was waited for. If the money was available, it was bought. If not, it was postponed. Today, debt has become the system itself. Houses, cars, even daily expenses are being written into the future. For the generation that lived through 1958, this is still a disturbing idea. In old America, even when supermarket shelves were full, people were frugal, because scarcity was in their memory. The memories of the war years, rationing periods, and contractions were vivid. The new America accepts abundance as normal, but the surprise is even greater when abundance ends. The 1958 recession taught the old America this: be prepared, even when everything is going well. The new America, however, often says, this time it's different. In the old America, the state was a distant but significant figure. Its intervention in crises was slow but lasting. In the new America, interventions are rapid, but their effects are shorter-lived. In old America, a crisis was talked about for generations. In new America, crises are more frequent, but forgotten more quickly. Perhaps that's where the biggest difference lies. Those who lived through 1958 are still cautious today. Today's young people, on the other hand, think they haven't yet experienced their own 1958. But history shows this. Every generation has a first shock. Old America took this blow silently. New America is taking it noisily, but the result is the same. People are changing, habits are changing, and the economy is always shaped by people's fears. That's why the 1958 recession is still important, because the line separating old America from new America was drawn right there, and that line is still not erased today. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.